Om Jnana-Timirandhasya Jnananjana-Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. I've been asked to speak today on the potentially controversial subject of men's duties, as it seems there's been some complaint or consternation from certain of our mothers that we hear a lot spoken about women's duties but not about men's duties. So of course this is not directly Krishna Katha, but it's also necessary to discuss such things so that we can be eligible for hearing Krishna Katha, because animals can't hear about Krishna Katha, and human beings with behavior like animals, they're also not very good candidates for hearing about Krishna Katha. So proper behavior is also important to understand what this is, especially in an age which is dedicated to promoting improper behavior. It's what's considered normal behavior in modern society is, according to Vaishnava standards, sinful. Yatra papas chaturvidham, the 4 sinful activities of meat eating, gambling, illicit sex and intoxication are considered normal and desirable by many people in the modern world. If it's considered good to eat lots of meat by some people. Some people think if you don't eat meat, there's something wrong with you. By some people it's considered good. They to have illicit sex among certain people. It's among certain groups of people it's considered prestigious to have illicit sex. One of the recent presidents of the United States was accused of having illicit extramarital sexual relationships. At first he denied it, then he was forced to admit it, but it didn't make any difference. It made very little difference to how the population of America perceived him. They thought, well, his job is to be the president, and what he does in his private life, well, that's his own business. So it's a very strange age. And discussing points I'm going to discuss today, which a short time ago in India and in many other countries it would have been considered a normal thing to say, but nowadays, due to the various influences, some of the statements I'm going to make might be considered sexist. It's a newly invented term, which means discriminating. Well, it usually means men discriminating against women in a way that's demeaning to women. Although theoretically it could also mean women discriminating against men in a way that's demeaning and exploitive of men. So as I was saying last night, we should, if we're going to be devotees of Krishna, then we should try to understand from Shastra. Tasmat Shastram Pramanante Karya Karya Vyavastito Gyatva Shastra Vidhanam Tam Karyam Karmai. What is it? Karyam Kartame Harhasi. Lord Krishna, at the end of the 16th chapter in Bhagavad Gita, in which he extensively discusses the demoniac propensity, states that knowing Shastra, one should act according to Shastra. Within that chapter he also states that the demons, one of their symptoms, asuras, pravritim cha navritim cha jana navidura asuraha. They do not know what is proper behavior and what is not proper behavior. That means according to the direction of Shastra. So these things are very confused in the modern age. The modern age is very confused in so many ways. I mean, the basic material condition is very confused in any age, and especially in Kali Yuga. The society is very disturbed in many ways. Modern society is very artificial and disturbed, and it's the age of Kali, the age of quarrel and hypocrisy. Women's roles are more artificial than at any other time in history, because the body of a woman, or the natural social role that goes with the body of a woman, is to have many children. And the psychology, the natural psychology that goes with a woman's body is also suitable for that. But now, in the name of giving women equal opportunity, they have to work in factories and offices and armies. They're expected to do some, it's called equal opportunity, which means they have to give up their natural propensity to have children and maybe have one or two like that. That's limited. So that's very disturbing, although they don't realize that. It disturbs their whole, they become very disturbed by that, by this unnatural situation they're in of not having children, or not having many children. Now, anyway, that's a prelude. So we're talking about women's duties and men. What are men's duties? We should hear about the men's duties. Well, actually, in Vedic culture, let's see, Shastra does speak about women's duties, but doesn't speak about men's duties per se. Varnashram roles are given. There's duties for Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas. There's Brahma Dharma, Kshatriya Dharma, Vaishya Dharma, Shudra Dharma, and Stri Dharma. So Stri Dharma is one category, which women's role in any Varna, it's the same, which means service to the husband, service to the elders, service to guests. That's Stri Dharma. And chastity, faithfulness, Pativrata. That's called Pativrata Dharma. Shastra is addressed specifically to men, particularly to men, Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, men of the higher castes. Young boys go to Gurukul, not girls. Girls remain at home. When a boy comes back from Gurukul, then he gets married, or he may be married before that, but he takes up Grihastha life, and it's the duty, is one of his duties to, his men's duty in traditional society is to teach the wife what he learned in Gurukul. So that's the system. The girls, they don't go out of home in traditional society. They remain at home, but they may learn at home also. And at home they learn the homely duties. There's different duties to perform. So that's one reason why men's duties as such are not addressed in Shastra, because they're as women's are, because there's a different set of duties for men according to which varna they're in, and of course in which ashram they're in. And for women there's one ashram. They're always in the home. As Srila Prabhupada often quoted, what is that? Nastriyam swatantra marhati, from Manu, that is not fit that women have independence. They should be protected in the childhood by their father, throughout most of their life by their husband, and in old age by their sons. Women are in Vedic culture are to be controlled, which in modern society, if we say that, people get very upset. But actually everyone is to be controlled. It's a disciplined society. Not exactly despotic. You know, despotic it means like being under Stalin, not this Tamil Nadu Stalin, but the original Georgian Stalin, who's created fear in the whole of society, but a disciplined society. In the modern age there's the idea of freedom to do whatever you like, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. That's considered freedom. So homosex, well, that's okay. It doesn't harm anyone. Or you eat meat, it doesn't harm anyone. I mean, they're only cows. So, and God gave the animals for men to eat. That's Christian philosophy, the so-called philosophy. So this idea you just enjoy yourself, it's a completely ignorant idea. They don't know the laws of karma. We may say, well, the Vedic rules, they don't apply nowadays. Oh, that point I was making, first of all, is in Vedic society, everyone is controlled, everyone is disciplined. Brahmanas, they are controlled by their self-control, self-disciplined. It means they voluntarily follow the order of Shastra. And Kshatriyas also, although Kshatriyas accept, even though they're physically very powerful, they accept the instruction of Brahmanas, and they're very strict. No one can break the rules of dharma in a dharmic society where there's a good king. So everyone's controlled. A man, when he gets married, it doesn't mean he's free. As long as his father's alive, he's under the control of his father. A man may be 60 years old, but still he has to do what his father says. He may have grandchildren himself, but still he's under the order of his father. So when we say that women are to be controlled, well, it is stressed more than men, but actually all of society is to be controlled. But there was very strict control. Even until recently it was considered, first of all, it was considered wrong that girls go to school. And now it's considered wrong not to send them to school. So you can see the whole way of thinking has changed. And then when they were sent to school, there were separate schools for girls and boys, and the girls would be accompanied to school and accompanied back. Nowadays they go to co-educational schools, boys and girls mix up, and the idea the girls will get degrees and this and that and have a career, and then they have abortions, and this is going on. This is adharma. So he may say that, well, times have changed. That's true, times have changed, but Krishna's laws of the universe have not changed. The principles of dharma and the laws of karma have not changed. So we can try to adjust ourselves to modern society, and to some extent we have to do so. But the more we adjust ourselves to Krishna's system, the better that will be for our spiritual advancement. And if we're not prepared to accept what Krishna says and what Srila Prabhupada says, if we say, well, Prabhupada said that, but times have changed, or Prabhupada didn't understand, then we fall in the category of demons, actually, because those who don't accept what Krishna says in Shastra, they are rated as demons. So we might be chanting Hare Krishna, but if we don't accept what Srila Prabhupada said, then our standing in Krishna consciousness is certainly not very strong. Srila Prabhupada himself did talk about these points a lot. He considered them important because he saw that the whole society is very much disordered. Srila Prabhupada did make some adjustments to modern life, but the main adjustment he wanted to make was to establish our own communities with our own culture, seeing that the modern culture is it's unfavorable, non-conducive for cultivating Krishna consciousness. So, there's some specific questions about men's duties. I asked, Nanda Kumar Prabhu asked me to speak on this, and I said, well, give me some points to speak about. So there's a list. It's more like a list of complaints. Men are more prone to fall down today than women. Well, it takes two to tango, as they say. They can't fall down unless they're unless they're women ready to cooperate. Then we see cases predominantly where men do not contribute to the spiritual development of the family. Men who are incapable of being good role models are unable to become leaders of the family and lead to the degradation, fall down of women and child. Now these are a list of complaints. It's not really that may deal with individual cases, but principles should be understood. Just like Srila Prabhupada said, that for women, for the girls who are the daughters of devotees, he said that we should train them to be first-class cooks and to be very chaste and faithful to their husband. So that's a principle. Now, the women may misbehave or the men may misbehave, but there's a principle. So the principle for the men is that they, in the modern age that means to provide for the family, and they should be the spiritual head of the family. But when it says the men don't contribute to the spiritual development of the family, well, as I understand it, the men, they traditionally are somewhat more distant from the children than the mothers, who are very intimate with the children. It's a different role. Men are expected to be more strict, which means that they have to discipline the children, which means they may not be so intimate as the mother is. So, and then, what is that? The first guru is the mother. She teaches materially and spiritually also. She may tell stories, especially grandmothers. They teach so many stories which they heard in their childhood. Also Srila Prabhupada said about the girls, they should hear the stories. This is traditional Indian culture, that the girls from their grandmothers, when they're growing up, they hear about Sita, Savitri, Arundhati, all the chaste women, they hear this and they model themselves on this. So the men may be somewhat aloof, but they're supposed to contribute to the spiritual development by setting a good example. They may not do so in every case. But then we hear sometimes women saying, well, if my husband's like Ram, then I'll be like Sita. And then who's going to be like Ram? But the point is that everyone has their dharma to follow. Even if the husband doesn't follow his dharma, that doesn't mean that a woman shouldn't follow her dharma. One gains perfection by following one's own dharma, even in difficulty. There's the case of Srila Prabhupada's sister, who was also initiated by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who Srila Prabhupada's father, Srila Prabhupada said that his father was a pure devotee of Krishna, but he married Srila Prabhupada's sister, Bhavatarini was her initiated name, although we, Prabhupada's disciples, used to call her Pishima, which means aunt. Prabhupada's father married her to a flesh eater. Exactly why, I don't know. It might have been difficult to find a vegetarian family, but she maintained her principles without complaining throughout life, despite the fact that her husband, from what we hear, wasn't a very good man. Also in Shastra, it's mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita, how a devotee should be chaste to Krishna. Even if Krishna, it seems, is giving the devotee so many difficulties, but still a devotee should remain very faithful to Krishna. And the example is given of the Kushta Ramani, the wife of a leper. There was a leper who was a Brahmin by caste, and he had the illicit desire to enjoy one certain prostitute who was known as, Shatahira, something like this. Her fee was very high. She was a high-class prostitute. She needed Lakhahira. No, she needed 1 lakh diamonds. That was her fee. And this leper Brahmana wanted to enjoy her. So the wife of this Brahmana saw that her husband is very morose. And she asked, why are you morose? He said, I want to enjoy this. He told her frankly, he was a shameless rascal. So it was impossible. He had neither had the money, nor who would, even a prostitute, even if you did pay her 20 lakh diamonds, who would want to cohabit with a leper? Anyway, the wife of the leper, she started going to that prostitute's house, and she would clean and sweep up unasked for. And I can imagine a Brahmana woman, very chaste, going to the house of a prostitute and doing menial service. So she was doing this, and after some time the prostitute asked, well, why are you doing this? Why are you coming to my house and cleaning? And she said, well, my husband, he wants to enjoy you, and so I don't have any money to pay you, but if you're pleased with this service, you can fulfill his desire. So the prostitute said, you call him, I'll feed him, call him to come for lunch, I'll feed him. So Brahmana, who's going to take lunch from her? Maybe she was a Brahmana prostitute, I don't know. Anyway, he went to her house. And she brought him the preparations in different preparations, different curries and different items in iron pot and gold pot. So she said, so do you want me to serve you from the iron pot or the gold pot? He said, well, what's the difference? She said, there's no difference, it's the same. It's the same curry, but some is in an iron pot and some is in a gold pot. So he said, well, what's the difference? She said, yeah. And she said, yeah, well, what's the difference? Your wife or me, what's the difference? You see, it's just your imagination that it will, one pot will taste better than the other. So he had some realization, and then that I'm such a rascal that my wife is humiliating herself practically by coming to this prostitute, and even she's got more spiritual realization than me. So maybe there are many cases. There was Ramanuja, he had a disciple lady who one merchant wanted to enjoy her, and so she refused. She was very beautiful, but she refused him again and again. One time Ramanuja with his disciples was coming to her house. She had nothing to feed him with. Her husband was out of home, so she said to the merchant, you give me what you like. Give me everything that I need, and then later I'll come and fulfill your desire. So he did that. He gave whatever she fed Ramanuja very nicely. And then again, the effect of her purity, that she wanted to serve her guru so nicely that she was prepared to sacrifice her chastity. Actually, it's not a sacrifice of chastity. That's the greatest purity to do so. But that again, she changed the merchant by her good behavior. He changed. So there are many examples of women being more spiritually advanced than their husbands. The gopis are the greatest examples. The Yagya Patnis in Vrindavan Leela, they're also great examples. But anyway, that example I was giving of the prostitute, and then we have Srila Prabhupada's sister, who was, toward the end of his life, her husband realized that my wife is actually a great devotee and I've been such a rascal all my life. And then his attitude changed. So, instead of joining the gender wars, which are part of modern life, women against men, men against women, if women follow their dharma, even if their husband doesn't, they will be glorified by doing so, and Krishna will appreciate that. Instead of fighting and saying that you're no good, you're useless, that won't help him. So submitting this kind of complaint, well, there may be complaints, but this Sri Dharma is generally to tolerate, which is actually very good for spiritual advancement. After all, Tarariva Sahishnuna, one is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, exhorts us to tolerate. And if there are problems, well, that's for traditionally, of course, that's for the community to sort it out. The community is, in modern society, again, it's broken down, the traditional communities, but among our Vaishnavas, we should develop communities in which we can help each other. But these marital problems, it seems to me many times trying to sort it out just makes it worse. It's just, husband and wife, you said this, no, well, I said that, well, you remember 3 years ago I came home and you didn't have that, blah, blah, blah. It goes on, and it's just nonsense, just like stupid children, it seems many times. So instead of making some kind of gender wars, that now the women have to bash the men or the men have to bash the women, just chant Hare Krishna together. And neither man nor wife is expected to be perfect, but the endeavor should be there to be perfect. That's the whole meaning of our practices in Krishna consciousness. And husband and wife should assist each other, but it's important to understand one's role. In modern life, it seems that Srila Prabhupada considered it like that because he did speak about it quite often. He considered that women's roles in particular are quite unnatural, which is again why he spoke about it quite a lot. Now, as I said, I've been asked to speak about men's roles, and here I am again speaking about women's roles. But it's, as I say, it seems that Srila Prabhupada, he seemed to put the emphasis on, well, he actually wrote in one purport that divorce is caused by womanly weakness. He said he's put the blame on the women in general. So you may say, well, that's not fair, and this and that. But if the woman follows her dharma of being very tolerant, a lot of the problems in family life would not be there if the women, instead of demanding so many things and expecting so many things, as modern society promotes, that you should get ahead, that you should just accept the role of being a wife. Then the husband, that's the way it's traditionally done. The wife pleases the husband, and the husband then naturally feels inclined to do whatever she wants. That's the traditional, that's the clever system. That the wife takes the role of the servant of the husband, and then he just does whatever she likes. Nowadays you can't imagine that. But that was the traditional system, and it seemed to work. I mean, there was no divorce in Indian society. Now it's been introduced, and they have all this psychological counseling, which was never there before. So you get on with life, and the husband's a bit strict or whatever. Well, you just have to live with it. You don't expect everyone to be perfect. Of course, the husband, he can't expect the wife to just be exactly like the way he wants her to be, what his conception of what a perfect Vedic wife should be. Anyway, what are the other complaints? Inability of men to control their senses makes them lusty, bewildered, and causes broken families. Yeah, so the instructions in Shastra are there to be followed. When we say there's no instructions in Shastra for men, or why is it only about women? Actually, all the instructions in Shastra are there for them. If you want the women, you think that the men are not in control of their senses, give them this Brahmachari book to read. It'll be very helpful for them, because Brahmacharya is the basis of spiritual life. Srila Prabhupada notes in one of the early Bhagavatam commentaries that because the brahmacharis are not properly trained, therefore there are no proper grihastas. So that's a fact. We don't have brahmachari training, so it may be difficult to be proper grihastas without that. Well, better late than never. I mean, you can read that book and imbibe the principles. So there is no actual spiritual advancement without sense control. And there's no happiness of any kind unless there's sense control. Ashantasya kuta sukham. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna rhetorically asks that where is the happiness for one who is not peaceful? And there's no peace of mind without sense control. So if we're not trained in that from birth, which we're not in the modern age, rather just the opposite, then at least having come to Krishna consciousness, we should try to imbibe that. That will be very helpful for us. Otherwise it's a vicious circle, that the grihastas produce uncontrolled children, And then each generation gets like geometrically worse. We're seeing that in modern life, especially in the Western world, where the whole culture is dedicated not to sense control, but to sense indulgence. So each generation is geometrically worse than the previous one. You have uncontrolled people with not only uncontrolled senses, but no idea of any sense control. Rather, their whole life is dedicated to non-sense control or sense indulgence. And they have children, you can imagine what the children are like, and then when their children have children, then what are their children going to be like? So it's a vicious circle, but we have to break that at some point. It's not very easy, that's understood. But again, tolerance is required. And more complaints. Irresponsible men provoke adultery in society. These are subjective statements. I mean, it may be that women also provoke adultery. When women do have the freedom to move around, then they may also provoke adultery. I mean, in the modern age, not here in Dubai, but in the Western world, and in India more than here in Dubai, where the culture, maybe because of, or quite likely because of Islam, is quite conservative. More than India, isn't it? In many ways. What do you think? So I would say that's probably likely to the effect of Islam. So for all of those who are dedicated Islam bashers, you can see that's something very good actually. Conservatism in intergender dealings. So in modern society you see women, they're encouraged even by their parents from a young age to dress in a manner that is sexually provocative. And then they complain when about being assaulted and this and that. It's a funny thing, like they dress in such a way to say, come and get me. And then when someone comes and gets them, they complain. So it's a mad world. So, I mean, these are subjective statements. Irresponsible men provoke adultery. But men and women both in modern society are trained, the culture is like that, to be sexually provocative to each other. And then it goes on. And thus unwanted children flood the human race at the risk of war and pestilence. Well, actually in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna said the opposite, didn't he? He said, Strishu dushtashu varshnaya jayate varna sankara. He said, when the women are polluted, then the whole society becomes contaminated. The women have to, it's a very responsible position to uphold the culture. The culture is largely upheld by, Arjuna suggests, by the women at home who are the first gurus who have to train their children. But if they are polluted, Arjuna suggests that then the whole society becomes full of unwanted populace, because then undiscriminating men will take advantage of that. So these matters are quite complex, but the general point is that everyone should try to follow this Vedic culture as far as possible and understand that this modern culture, although it's promoted as being very good, it's actually anti-people. It doesn't work for the spiritual benefit of anyone, certainly, and not even for the material benefit. In modern society, people think they're very advanced, but in a place like Dubai, which is supposed to be materially advanced, even if you're even the richest person, the sheikh or whatever, he can't breathe fresh air. he can't get fresh food, and water is all polluted. So where's the benefit for anyone? And everyone's mind is polluted. That's the worst thing. So this whole society, it doesn't work for the benefit of anyone. So the values of this society, although it's promoted, modern society is so good, women have their freedom. What freedom? To go out and work in a factory? Work in an office? Freedom that they're told that having children is below your dignity, although it's the natural thing for women to do. And the thing that actually by psychology, it's natural psychology is the natural thing that every woman wants to do, is to have children. And if they don't have children, and then they're likely to have severe hormonal disturbances, breast cancer, gynecological cancer. The idea that modern society is better and women have to kick the men in the heads, or the men have to kick the women in the heads, it's just another symptom of this bizarre demoniac society. So as far as possible within this bizarre demoniac society, which most of our devotees, as far as I can see, are still very much in the illusion that it's, at least in India, our devotees are still, they don't really believe what Prabhupada says about modern society being demoniac. They still believe what they learned in the schools and on the TV and from the broader culture, that actually modern society is very nice. But if we believe that, we're not going to be able to make proper advancement. And then we're going to say, well, Prabhupada was wrong and he was anti-woman. No, Prabhupada is the greatest benefactor of the whole human society. And therefore he spoke the truth, even though people don't like to hear it. And then we say that, well, Prabhupada was out of date and so many things. That's our foolishness. Okay, any questions, please? If you want, you can write them down. I'm open to whatever you want to say. I don't necessarily agree with it or endorse it, but at least the floor is open. It's a tough subject because in our society, ISKCON also, there is a distinct difference of approach. I mean, there are some who say that, well, Prabhupada treated the men and women equally. Srila Prabhupada and others who say that, well, no, we should see what Prabhupada said about Varnashram roles. Prabhupada did speak and write a lot about Varnashram roles. My understanding is that Srila Prabhupada, as a practical preacher, he saw in the Western countries that men and women, they do mix up and they don't have the traditional understanding of society. So, therefore, he engaged men and women as preachers. Srila Prabhupada said, it is our policy to engage both men and women as preachers. He didn't say it's our principle. In one purport, he wrote that it's our policy, because in the Western countries, men and women mix up. But Srila Prabhupada said, he also said that he wanted that we should move toward the traditional society, because that is the one which is favorable for cultivating Krishna consciousness. Whereas the modern way of life, the men and women mix up too much, which is a cause of falldom, as the example is given in Shastra of ghee. If it's placed next to fire, naturally it melts. So if men and women are left alone, then, or if they come into close proximity with each other, then the meltdown starts to take place. Therefore we find in Bhagavatam and in Manu, the same verse is quoted, that Matri Swasra Duhitra Va Naviviktasano Bhavet. Balavan Indriya Gramo Vidlang Samapi Karshati. Srila Prabhupada would quote this often, that one should not sit close to one's mother, sister or daughter, because the senses, what to speak of other women, because the senses may become agitated. And Srila Prabhupada, when he quoted this verse, he may say, well, surely only a rascal would get agitated by sitting next to their mother, sister or daughter. But Prabhupada would quote that Vidvang Samapi, even a highly learned person can become disturbed, even sitting next to their mother, sister or daughter. Now, Srila Prabhupada did say that, one contention that Srila Prabhupada treated men and women equally. He gave them equal opportunity for spiritual advancement, but he didn't necessarily engage them equally. For instance, he didn't make any men GBCs. He did say of Yamuna that I would have made her a GBC if she had been a man. So it seems that he had a specific policy of not making women GBCs, because he believed in the principle that men should be leaders and women should have a subordinate social role. When Srila Prabhupada was going to meet Indira Gandhi, he had a list of several proposals. One was that she should retire from being the Prime Minister and make Sanjay the king. He didn't like democracy either. So he said, you become the mother queen and make Sanjay the king. Sanjay is widely rated as a rascal himself. But Srila Prabhupada was suggested to make Sanjay the king under Prabhupada's guidance. Srila Prabhupada didn't make women temple presidents. There was one case, I believe, in 1968, where the temple consisted of two people, husband and wife. The husband left Krishna consciousness, so Prabhupada said the woman, she can become the temple president. And she was the only member of the temple. So, you can call this sexist if you like, but this was Srila Prabhupada's outlook. Yeah, so there are those who say that, well, Prabhupada was, at this point, that Prabhupada said that, well, when men and women come to Krishna consciousness, what is that? They said that they become equal, something like that. I can't remember exactly. Or when women become devotees, but it's not that when a jiva in a woman's body, let us always remember that we're not men, we're not women. Naham vipro na chanarapati napi vaisho na shudra. We're not part of this material designation at all, but we have to act within certain designations as long as we're in this world. So it's not that a woman, as soon as she picks up a bead bag and starts to chant Hare Krishna, she overcomes all her previous conditioning. It's not true of a man either. As Srila Prabhupada noted, in the case of Gandhari, that when Kunti delivered a child before Gandhari, Gandhari was so upset that Kunti had delivered a child before Gandhari, that Gandhari in frustration beat her, she was pregnant, and she beat her embryo, which therefore broke up. And therefore she didn't just get one piece of trouble, she got 100. It's actually like, she actually caused what seemed to be a miscarriage, but then Vyas arranged for some, what do they call that? Embryo incubation. In modern science they have this. They incubate the embryo. So Vyas did that, and then they got 100 troublemakers instead of just one. And one daughter. She had 101 children. So Prabhupada in the purport, when he was discussing this, said that even in the case of such a great person as Gandhari, such a great model, that she, even though she was so beautiful and so qualified, when she heard that her husband was going to be a blind man, she made herself blind by blindfolding herself, so as not to be in an advantageous position over her husband, not to be more than her husband. She voluntarily became blind. So such a highly principled, chaste woman, she also, Prabhupada said, because of womanly nature, she also became envious that Kunti delivered before her. So it's not that just by picking up a bead bag we instantly become free from our conditioning. What if a woman have to work as a desire of her husband in bad circumstance? Difficult one, because it's a choice of one adharma or another adharma. I mean, women working, it's not completely against Vedic culture. I mean, men and women both would work. The idea of going to work is a modern idea. You go to a factory to work or something like this. But generally, people would have that. I mean, everyone would work. What is that? Niyatam kuru karma tvam. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, always do your work. So everyone's supposed to work. Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatu tishtatya karma krit. No one cannot work even for a moment, Krishna says. So everyone has to work. But the idea of going out to a job, that's a Shudra dharma actually. So otherwise women would work and contribute to they may contribute to the economics of the family also, in various families. For instance, they might produce pickles at home which are sold. So in this, or knit sweaters at home which are sold. So it's not that going out, that contributing to the economics of the family is necessarily a bad thing. But going out to mix with other men in the workplace is clearly not very good for women if they want to be chaste. If their husband forces them, which is quite common in the modern age, then they're put in a very difficult situation. Well, the best thing would be to, before marriage, to make it clear that the parents who are giving away the daughter, of course nowadays the daughters don't get given away so much as they just find their own husband, which is actually according to Manu that women can find their own husband. If the father hasn't arranged for her marriage after she's had 3 monthly periods, then she, according to Manu, she can find her own husband. It's supposed to be done before maturation. So that would be the best thing if the parents give her away to a family where they don't have this adharmic idea which is prominent in India at the present time, that the girls, we don't want a girl unless she's going to work, isn't it? They say like that. Families say, we want a working girl. So they want their wives or daughters to be spoiled. If she's not spoiled, we don't want her. So best to, if you have any sense yourself, which is not that common nowadays, to give your daughter only in a family where they won't push her out to work. Or, if possible, they're working at home. There are many things nowadays, especially computer-related stuff, which can be done at home. But actually, when women have children, their real work is to look after their children, which, as every woman with children knows, is it's more than a full-time job. If you say a full-time job is 9 hours a day, but looking after children is potentially 24 hours a day. There are no fixed hours. It's not that the children have a fixed crying time. It's, whenever they feel like it, which can be any time. So, there's one of the duties of men, is to appreciate their wives. There's a good thing to do. That's important, isn't it? Appreciate their wives' sacrifice. Why a woman's life is a life of sacrifice and dedication. So it's good if the husbands appreciate that. So what to do if the husband wants you to work? Well, if they're devotee, if the husband's a devotee, then should discuss that with some other. Family problems or disagreements can be brought to senior members of the devotional community, and hopefully the senior members of the devotional community will also understand this important principle, that it's not at all good for the family that the woman leaves the children at home or puts them in some kindergarten or something like this, and goes off and spends more time with other men than her husband. And she shouldn't spend any time with them. What to speak of all day, every day. And if the husband is non-devotee and doesn't accept this, then it puts you in a very difficult situation. We hear nowadays that, well, without the wife earning, you can't cover the home expenses. Well, for devotees, home expenses should be much less, right? I mean, don't have a TV, don't go to movies. Of course, you have to donate to the knowledge fund here. That's some expense. But then you get your Friday meal. I mean, you contribute, but then your Friday meal is taken care of. We don't eat meat, which is expensive. Don't drink or smoke. No onions and garlic. Well, that's fairly cheap, isn't it? Garlic is expensive. But meat is expensive, isn't it? So you save a lot of money. No coffee. No going to restaurants. So you should save a lot of money. And devotees don't want a luxurious life. So if we live simply, then hopefully we should. And another thing, this idea you have to send your children to the topmost school which costs so much money, that may also not be necessary. A lot of times devotees, they enter this the kami idea. In kami society, everyone takes so many financial strains on themselves unnecessarily. Now they have to buy a big house back in India. So many things. They put themselves in debt. Better live simply. And if the woman's forced by her husband to go to work, then I guess there's not much you can do about it, is there? Do the best you can under difficult circumstances. For security, a woman is always protected from child by father and husband and son. What happens to a woman whose husband dies at a very early age, say just after marriage? As such, she can't marry as per Vedic injunction. She can't remarry. Well, that's not necessarily true. That seems to be more like a Hindu tradition that's come up. But there are various Smriti Shastras which give guidelines and to how to live in society. I mean, the Manu Smriti is very famous, Parashara Smriti, Yajnavalkya, and there are others, Vishnu Smriti, Narada Smriti. So it's not that all these Smriti writers, they forbid, if the woman, her husband dies just after marriage, they say that's a woman's sacrifice to look after the children. So as some Smriti writers, they allow, I mean, that the woman, she can remarry, even if they have young children, may be allowed. So it seems to be more of a Hindu tradition that's anyway broken down in the modern age, that women, if their husband dies, they can't remarry. So I'm not against it, even though I'm a certified woman hater. Supposed to be. If the husband is in financial difficulty and the woman goes out to work, isn't she fulfilling her duty, dharma? Well, as Bhishma said when Draupadi petitioned him, is this dharma that I'm being dragged in this assembly? He said, well, the ways of dharma are very subtle. He avoided the question. Theoretically, it could be. Often the principles of dharma, they become... One principle of dharma is not to practice it, one may break another principle of dharma. Overall, understanding the culture, it would seem that generally it would be considered that even in that circumstance, the wife would not go independently. Maybe together with the husband, they could go like that. Like on the building sites, for instance, the husbands and wives are together. That's India's increasing. India's prosperity is increasing, but it's actually at the expense of exploiting the Adivasis who work for next to nothing. For instance, on building sites, isn't it? And they have to sleep on the building site, and they just eat some very plain food, and no one seems to care very much about them except the politicians at the time of elections. So, but anyway, there's an example of women who they go to work with their husbands. How important is the fourth regulated principle? That's the euphemistic way of saying no illicit sex among husband and wife, and how does it affect one's guru/spiritual life? All the regulated principles are regulated principles, which are to be followed. If they're not followed, if we don't follow, then we don't make spiritual advancement. On the other hand, if a wife refuses that facility to her husband and he goes somewhere else, and he puts him and the whole family, he becomes more fallen by doing so, and the whole family is put into jeopardy. If God is controlling everything, then why are innocent children are tortured, women are raped, and terrorists are at large? Because God gives us independence, minute independence, which we can use or misuse. And when we misuse it, we come to this material world, which is the world of exploitation. Because we ask questions like that, we come to the material world. It says, Brahmins, question mark. For Brahmini, I can't understand. Oh, does it? Oh, I see. It begins on the other side. Is educating, modern education, girls are wrong? Question mark. Well, whoever asked this question isn't very well educated. Not in English, anyway. Modern education is wrong, boys and girls. The whole thing is wrong. The whole basis of it. The education means to give education about the purpose of life. Without that, everything is a mess. Yeah, and girls, I've said that already. That educating girls, practically education is how to be a prostitute, how to make yourself available, usable. Is the meaning of Brahmana Dharma means for men? Yeah, that's the as I said, the Shastra is directed toward men. So the instructions are given for men. Self-realization is principally a male. The human form of life, especially in the male form, is suitable for self-realization. And women, they can share in that by serving their husband. That's the traditional system. By serving their husband, they get the same result. which is why they don't have to do traditionally Brahmanas, they perform severe austerities, so many rituals, but the women, they just had to serve their husbands and they'd get the same result. That's why one time a group of rishis, they approached Vyasadeva at his ashram. They wanted to ask him 3 questions. What is the best yuga? What is the best varna? And what is the best gender? So when they came, Vyasadeva was bathing in the Alaknanda, that river goes in front of his ashram. So Vyasadeva, he knows everything. So the sages, they approached him. He was in the river, and bathing means you go down 3 times, right? So he went down 1 time, came up and said Kali Yuga. Means the best yuga is Kali Yuga. And he went down 1 more time, came up and said Shudra. And he went down 1 more time, came and said woman. So it seemed to be opposite. It should be Satya Yuga, Brahmanas. Satya Yuga is the best stage. Brahmanas are the best caste or varna. Caste is not exactly the same as varna. And men are better because they're supposed to be more suited for self-realization. But then Vyasadeva explained Kali Yuga is the best. Why? Well, Vyasadeva explains that in Srimad Bhagavatam also, that Kaling sabhajantarya gunagya sarabhagina yatra sankirtananeva sarva swartho bhilapyate. That persons who are actually knowledgeable of the qualities, they glorify or they worship Kali Yuga as the best, because in this age, simply by Krishna Sankirtan, everything is attained. Whereas in other yugas, to attain the goal of life is very difficult, by any means. Then he said Shudras are best, because simply by serving they don't have to go through any difficulties. They simply, if they faithfully serve the higher caste, then their dharma is fulfilled. And similarly for women, that simply by serving their husband, they don't have to undergo the difficulties that he does, but they get the same result. ISKCON allowing women to become a guru, is it right? Well, there are instances within our sampradaya of women being gurus. They were highly exceptional, just like Janava Devi is the internal potency of Nityananda Prabhu. So from the spiritual platform, it's acceptable. What are you doing? No more questions? No more time? Okay. Although it's obviously it's going to be more difficult for a woman to advise her and to take the role of a guru, because she herself has duties in the home which go on through life. She can't be independent of that. There are also various factors. I mean, at the time when a man retires from home, panchasordvam vanam vrajet, at the age of 50, men are supposed to retire and completely dedicate themselves to spiritual life. Please take note of that, all of you. I know you're not going to do it, but somewhere might do it, although most don't do it because they're too attached, overly attached to their families. But at the age of 50, men are supposed to come out from the home, not necessarily to be sannyasi, but to be a vanaprastha, to disentangle themselves from family duties. Of course, people have debts which they have to go on working, so there are various factors. But it's around that age, if we say the women are about 10 years younger or 5 years younger, that's the age of menopause, which is an extremely difficult time for the women, and men who know about wives with menopausal difficulties, they can probably understand why women shouldn't be gurus, because anyway, if you know, you know. It's a very difficult time of life. So Hare Krishna, I'll finish that. Whatever you do, chant Hare Krishna. Hare Nama, Hare Nama, Hare Nama eva kevalam. Hello, Nascheva, 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 Gatiranyata. We're not the body, we're not men or women in the material sense. Spiritually, we're all women, we're all Prakriti of Krishna, to be enjoyed by Krishna. This is the understanding. But at the same time, as long as we are within this material world, we have to act according to some social conventions, and those that are given in the Vedic literature and tradition are best for spiritual progress.